Thank you for joining the April 2023 VMware TAM customer webinar. This webinar is organized by the VMware TAM organization to provide our customers the opportunity to hear great content and interact directly with great speakers that are delivering it, with the goal of making sure that you are getting the full benefit from your software. Please make use of the Q&A feature to ask any questions, and if your question doesn't get addressed today, be sure to reach out to your TAM and ask them to follow up. Before we get into today's content, there are just a couple of announcements. Our next TAM customer webinar will be on May 11th, and we'll have the privilege of being joined by Joshua Solomon to talk about vSphere Identity Roadmap. As I mentioned earlier, we want you to benefit from these sessions by interacting with the speakers. So if you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we'll address them during the webinar. At the end of today's session, you'll be prompted to fill out a simple survey related to the value you received from this session and any topic suggestions for the future. Your completion of the survey is very valuable input that we use to guide future sessions. We greatly appreciate your participation. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and your TAM can make the recording link available to you. After a few months, the recording will be publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. That brings us to today's speaker and topic. Brock and Brian are cloud solutions architects at VMware and will be talking to us about costing. Brock, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, so much for the intro. So I am Brock Peterson, a cloud solution architect at VMware, and I am teamed up with Brian Lewis today. Brian, you want to intro?
Good day, everybody. Brian Lewis. I'm also with Brock in the CMBU multi-cloud business unit, and I'm a senior solutions engineer for multi-cloud. Pleasure.
Great. Thank you, Brian. So I was actually just looking through the list of participants, and I see a bunch of customers out there, a bunch of teammates. This is awesome. I love that we have almost 100 people on the call today. So we're going to talk about quite a few different things today, right? We're going to talk about costing, of course, right? That's what we're here to talk about. Costing, pricing, showback, chargeback, be it on-prem, be it VMC, be it public cloud. But first, we're going to take a little bit of a step back to kind of talk about the broader, what we used to call vRealize suite of tools and is now called the Aria suite of tools. So we'll talk about what was, sort of on the truck yesterday, what's on it now, some of the new services that we've announced and how they relate to costing. So please go ahead and ask any questions in the Q&A. Brian or I will address those as we can. And Brian Lewis, if you have anything to add during my sides, please do.
Absolutely.
Okay. So anyway, what did vRealize Cloud Management look like yesterday, right? So all of these products are familiar to those of you on the call, kind of working from top to bottom here. We start with our APM and work our way down through vRealize Automation, right? So this is the former vRealize suite of tools. Today, we're going to talk about the dark blue line, vRealize Operations specifically for vCenter, VMC costing, and then CloudHealth, or what we now call Aria Operations or Aria Cost, provided by CloudHealth. So I wanted to show you just kind of how that fit into the broader scheme of things, right? So the vRealize suite providing things like monitoring, troubleshooting, the ability to do log intelligence, capture logs, provide security and network, et cetera. But you'll notice the second item there is cost and capacity. So vRealize Operations, as well as CloudHealth, have the ability to provide cost, to provide price, and to provide capacity around those. So operations can do quite a few different things. The four pillars, as you know, when you log in, provide visibility into that. But today we're going to focus on just the cost and a little bit of capacity. And then Brian's going to dig into what public cloud costing and potentially a little bit of right sizing looks like with CloudHealth. So that said, where did we go to? As you know, last year at VMworld, we announced a couple new services and a rebrand of some of our existing stuff. So this is what that looks like. So previously vRealize Cloud Management, today VMware Aria Cloud Management, buttressed by a couple different services, Hub and Graph, right? So Hub is really the front end or our catalog, if you will, providing visibility into all of the services under underneath, right? So things like Aria Operations, which is formerly vRealize Operations, Aria Automation, which is formerly VRA. And then, of course, that is all covered with the at-scale data store called Aria Graph. Aria Graph is really providing the relationships, the management, et cetera, of all of the services, and we are publishing it via Graph or via Hub, sorry. There's a few other services in here that are new as well, Guardrails, Migration, and Business Insights, whereas the ones in green here, they're the ones that we're going to focus on today. So Aria Operations and Aria Cost, powered by CloudHealth. So that's what the suite looks like today, where I am personally going to focus on Aria Operations and Costing. Brian will talk a little bit about CloudHealth. So what is Aria Operations? I'm guessing everybody on the call either has it deployed or has looked at it. There's all sorts of good things that it can do. Performance monitoring and optimization, right? So you can monitor performance. We capture thousands of metrics. The AI ML data analytics engine does some analytics around that, makes projections, provides you with performance details, and tells you maybe how to optimize things, workload optimization, VM right sizing, things like that. The second line here is the capacity and cost engine, right? So we can make capacity recommendations as well as determine costs. So that's what I'm going to focus on, and I'll get into how that engine works here in a bit, but I wanted you to see where it fits into kind of the broader suite of things, right? Because we're going to dig into vRealize Operations and do a bit of a demo later on. And as you know, there's lots of function, right? So within the UI, I want you to know where to go, how to adjust the cost settings, and where it fits within the broader suite. Of course, we can do configuration and compliance, as well as troubleshooting and remediation, right? The troubleshooting workbench came out 8.0 timeframe. The latest and greatest, by the way, for vRealize Operations is 8.10.2 today. And then, of course, Aria Operations SaaS. So what does that look like? It looks like there's a couple of questions in the Q&A, Brian, if you want to get those.
Yep, I grabbed them already.
Okay, beautiful. So Aria Operations Cost homepage. If you go on the left-hand side over to Plan and Cost, you will see an overview of cost in your environment. Across the top, you have the different VMC tabs, as well as vSphere on-prem. Then, of course, you have tabs for the hyperscalers, the big three at least, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. So this was redeveloped, redesigned 8.10-ish timeframe, but kind of giving you a one-stop shop for all things costing, right? So we provide costs for on-prem, private cloud, local cloud, whatever you want to call it, but we're trying to give you a landing page, a place where you can go to determine all costs for whatever environment you're looking at. And then over on the right-hand side, you see all of the cost, showback, chargeback, price-related dashboards that have been developed as a part of that, right? So I'm not going to show all those in the slide deck here. I'll show some of them in the demo. But what that allows you to do is basically jump from your landing page, from the cost page, into things like assessment of costs or visibility into what a VM might cost versus what the price might be or what you're charging back. Of course, this cost homepage gives you the ability to see data kind of day by day, by week, by month, what have you. But the ability to kind of jump out from here into the dashboards is a real value add. Now, jumping into the what if analyses, we highlight this just to show that not only is costing a part of the cost page, but it's also a part of the what if analysis. So everything that we have going into the capacity analysis here also shows in the workload planning. So when you do something like adding VMs, adding migration to VMware Cloud, migration to public cloud, you will use any of the cost that we've already consumed or the cost drivers that we've configured. So with that, let's talk about the cost allocation process. So cluster cost feeds into base rates feed into VMs and provide you with your VM cost, right? So it seems easy enough. Well, there's a few different things that need to go into cluster costs, like cost drivers, things like that, as well as base rates and how those base rates are actually configured. So we're going to dig into all of the gory details. We're going to show a little bit about cost drivers and those as well. So how do we determine base rates? A few different ways. So there's 3 different ways we can determine base rates. One, based on usable capacity after HA and buffer, right? So usable capacity after HA and buffer has been configured. You can then configure your cost drivers, which will, of course, change infrequently. And then VM cost is based on utilization and base rate. Secondarily, you can determine base rates on actual utilization. So how much your cluster is being utilized, cost drivers. VM cost will then be based on VM utilization and base rate. The third spot is allocation model. So what you can do in this case is adjust your policies for allocation model and determine overcommit ratios. This cost allocation model will be based on number of vCPU allocated, memory allocated, disk allocated. So there's 3 different ways that we can actually determine base rates. You get to choose whichever you want, right? So you want usable capacity after HA and buffer, you can do that. If you want actual utilization, which will change quite frequently, right? Because it's based on the actual CPU, memory, and disk being used by a VM. Or you can use the allocation model, which will be based on actual allocations, and this won't change much at all. So what does that look like? Cluster cost, so the base rate calculation is determined in cost settings. So if you go into cluster cost settings, and you go to change, you'll see there are a couple different values there. Default is cluster usable capacity after HA and buffer. We give you a little bit of a description there based on what it is, what it takes into consideration, et cetera. And then the cluster actual utilization is the second option, both radio buttons within cluster cost. Now, if you want to use the allocation model, you have to adjust the policy for cluster compute or data store cluster within the policy, right? So go into your policies, grab the cluster compute resource, go down to allocation model, and you can set your overcommit ratios there, right? So your overcommit ratios, here I have 8-to-1, 12-to-1, 15-to-1, whatever ratios work for you, put in for allocation model, and then you can go ahead and determine your base rates based on allocation. And whatever allocation model you put in here, say you put in for CPU, but not for memory and disk, that means CPU will use the allocation model, whereas memory and disk will not. So what does that look like? Beyond just allocation, we also have the ability to do cost drivers, right? So if you go into cost settings, you'll see 4 different tabs: cost drivers, cluster cost, cloud providers, and pricing. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. But the cost drivers allow you to factor in things like server costs, excuse me, storage costs, licensing, applications, maintenance, facilities, et cetera, et cetera. We also have the ability to upload, import, export in mass, meaning if you have a spreadsheet that you're maybe using to track all of your hosts, if you have purchase dates, purchase prices, et cetera, you now have the ability to export and import from the cost drivers tab. So finally, based on purchase prices, we do have the ability to depreciate purchase servers anywhere from 2 to 5 years, and we can do it a couple different ways. So you can use the straight line depreciation model, which depreciates basically the same value every year, or you can do a max of double or straight, which kind of front loads your depreciation. So again, this is based on purchased servers. And then of course, we capture some of those depreciation metrics and properties via the 3 or 4 that are listed below. So this allows you to kind of work your way through some of the metrics, some of the properties, track them in a dashboard, a report, what have you. So how does that factor in? So if you recall before, we had the cluster cost, which feeds into base rates, which feeds into VM costs. Well, excuse me, secondarily, we now take cost drivers, which we configured, factor in depreciation, which then feeds into cluster cost base rates and ultimately gives us our VM costs. Now, what if we're looking outside of vCenter, right? vCenter on-prem, local cloud, private cloud, whatever you want to call it. Well, we do have the ability to do bill-based costing for VMC and AWS. What does that look like? So if you jump into your cloud account for VMC and AWS, you'll see a tab for billing enabled. Basically, this tells us to collect your VMC bills, right? So if you're connected to whatever org ID is in, go ahead and turn billing enabled to true, and you'll start collecting bills. So what does that mean? Effectively, we're going to take your bill, factor that into your cluster costs, and provide that data back to you. So a couple different ways that we'll do it, but the VMC cost overview dashboard is generally where you will kind of publish those costs, right? So you'll have a purchase history, an expense trend, et cetera, and we'll break it down by subscription. We have a few different cost drivers that we can factor into VMC and AWS. So you can do licensing costs, you can do additional costs. So if you're using tagging, for example, or license fees, you have the ability to kind of factor that into any of your VMC and AWS costs as well. So now, if you recall our cost allocation process, we can discover your SDDC, VMC and AWS, collect the bill, and then factor that into our cluster costs, our base rate, and our VM costs. So another way that we have to capture costs for the VMC on AWS, AVS, as well as GCVE is based on your rate card. So when I say rate card, I mean the rate cards within your cost settings. So you have the ability to edit rate cards for our cloud providers. So you can see all of those that we have here. So you can adjust the rate cards to be whatever negotiated price that you have, upload that rate card, and we will use that rate card to factor in pricing, right? Or costs. You also have the ability to adjust depreciation models as well as cost ratios, meaning you can set your cost ratios, you can set additional discount prices, and you can do it per org, per region. So be it VMC, AVS, or GCVE. So what does our rate card-based cost look like in this case? We're going to discover the SDDC. We're going to use rate card-based cost rather than bill-based cost. That will then factor into your cluster cost using your base rates and ultimately the VM costs. So oftentimes we'll talk about cost and showback. We'll also talk about pricing and chargeback. They're two different things, right? Cost is really what it costs for you to provide a service, right? So how much it costs your IT department to run a VM, be it private cloud, be it public cloud, what have you. How much you spend to actually make the service. And then showing back is just showing that back to management, internal departments, whatever it might cost for a particular VM. Now, price and chargeback is what you might make or what you might profit, right? So this is where you're going to create an actual bill to charge a customer. So there might be some service fees, there might be uplift fees, there might be an upcharge for maintenance, for the VM build, for service, for storage, various ways that you can do that. A couple customers I see on the call here, I've actually worked with to do some pricing and chargeback type information. There's a few ways that we can do it, but there's a couple different dashboards that I encourage folks to use before we get into the actual pricing card itself. One is the chargeback or VM price, and these go back to that cost homepage, and you can kind of jump out to these dashboards from there. But this is a new dashboard for virtual machine chargeback. You can select your group kind of on the left-hand side, and then you'll see your various charges, right? Upcharges, backups, replication, service charges. And then you'll see where you might be able to actually reclaim some idle capacity, things like powered off VMs, idle VMs, VMs of snaps, and whatnot. Same sort of thing for VMC and AWS, AVS, GCV, and OCVS. You have the ability to do your pricing. So what does that pricing card look like? If you go into cost settings, across the top, you'll see cost drivers, cluster costs, cloud providers, and pricing. A few different ways that you can provide pricing. One is based on cost, and 2 is based on rate. So if we're doing our cost, we can do an uplift, for example, maybe 1.1x or a 10% uplift. If you're doing a rate, well, maybe you just want to charge for a dollar amount for a vCPU, a dollar amount for a gig of RAM, a dollar amount for a gig of disk. So you have the flexibility to do either or. I was recently working with a customer on some pricing based on rate, right? They had certain rates that they wanted to charge for things, and then we were using vSphere tags to do things like replication or backups or storage or whatnot. But you have the ability to do both. So once you have defined your pricing, well, now you have VM cost as well as VM price, right? So you can actually see how much it costs for you to run a VM in your private cloud, and then what you might charge back to a customer, right? So there are 2 different metrics. All of the metrics are available in vRealize Operations. We can group them differently. We can provide them back to you in the form of dashboards, in the form of reports. We can even generate alerts on them. But there is a distinct difference between VM cost and price. So keep that in mind when you're looking at cost versus price. So public cloud costing, Brian, I am going to throw this over to you and I will answer the questions in the Q&A.
Fabulous. So thank you. This is Brian Lewis, and I'll have you just back up one, if you would be so kind. And so I just wanted to call this to the attention is that, Brock has done an absolutely phenomenal job of discussing, operations and what it can do with your on-prem. Just when it comes to costing, it is common for me to get the question, I'm sure Brock gets the same question, of why is there costing in CloudHealth and why is there costing inside of operations, and which one would be better or why are they different? And the answer is, and I'll get Brock's opinion on this also, feel free to chime in, is that, if you have a traditional on-prem environment, you have your ESX boxes, virtual centers, storage, networking, etc. Operations would be obviously your choice to inventory everything that's on-prem, as well as assigning costs to them. And as Brock showed with the chargeback, guilt back, showback, etc. There would be no reason if you were only on-prem to have something such as CloudHealth or Aria Cost, because that's geared towards FinOps and the cloud environment. So if you had on the opposite side of the scale, if you swung over to saying, we don't have anything on-prem, we have moved it all to the cloud, then you would want to use CloudHealth. CloudHealth is geared towards all of that ingestion of all of your tagged assets, cost and usage reports, etc., into CloudHealth, and make recommendations for cost savings, because that is the point of CloudHealth, is to help you save money. Because if you can save money, then you can reallocate that into other things that will help you drive and grow your business. Alternately, as we'll talk about here in just a moment, you can use, they are complementary. So you can actually, through a free management pack, a slide coming up, you can connect the 2 together, and then you can push information northbound or southbound between the 2 if you happen to have an environment that spans both on-prem and cloud. So thus you would have costing, showback, chargeback, guilt back inside of each one of these offerings, and yet they can still function together and be complementary. Next slide, please, Brock. Perfect. So when we're talking about, VMware Aria Cost powered by CloudHealth, it is a SaaS only. You do not deploy it on-prem. I've had several people ask if you can pull down an OVA and pop it out there. The answer is no. This is a SaaS offering. It has cost and usage visibility in it. It's geared towards cost and resource optimization, and then governance and automation. So there are a number of pieces inside of it that we'll take a look at and analyze any of the hyperscalers that you're connected to. They're listed down below. We'll explore it when we go into the demo. Not listed here, we just added in Alibaba Cloud. I think this one doesn't have it. No, it's not on the screenshot right here because it's just before the release of the Alibaba Cloud, but we now support that also. On the far right-hand side in this screenshot, you'll see data center. That is if we, and we'll talk about that in a second, if we add in the management pack and connection from operations, because we happen to have on-prem and cloud that we would like to monitor and show the chargeback on, then the data center is the section where you would do it. And then we can do a multi-cloud costing comparison, as well as scenarios, much like what Brock was showing and will show in his demo, for if you wanted to migrate to the cloud, where do you best spend your money? Maybe it's better on-prem, maybe it's better in the cloud, but being armed with that information is very important so that you can then go to the powers that be and make the recommendation of, for our particular company, this is where something best resides. Next slide, please, Brock. Thank you, sir. So public cost overview. Public cost inside of CloudHealth, we have a number of screens. I'll show them to you in just a little bit. That will take a look at the various support for which clouds you're going to connect to, which regions, billing accounts, projects, and cloud products. We also, inside of CloudHealth, it's very common for people to say, well, what if I have a number of business units that are underneath me? Can I subdivide that? And so we have built into CloudHealth flexible organizational units. We just call them flex orgs for short. And this allows you to subdivide the billing coming in into individual organizations nested underneath your master payer connection, and then take that billing and push it down to those organizations. Then through access control lists, allow those BUs or those organizations to be able to log in, see only billing that is associated with them, and or automatically generate their showback information and have that sent to them or downloaded in a CSV format. So you don't actually have to log into the product. You can set up automatic push out of that information on a weekly or monthly or whatever basis to an email address or a set of email address or a Slack group or whatever it happens to be. We also have, not shown right here, but before we move to the next slide, we also have connections for inbound information, not only from operations, but other sources such as Datadog and et cetera. So we can pull information in and then leverage our open APIs to push stuff out if you want to ingest it into another product that is you're using in your environment for some type of display or billing. Next slide, please, Rob. So tracking the costs of clouds inside of CloudHealth, you'll see two of them right here. We have highlighted on the data center, which I'll show you when I move into my demo. We can take a look at the information, as I mentioned before, that's pushed up from operations, and we can see the costing of the data center, as well as multi-cloud costs and cost driver history from the data center across everything that you're connected to, from AWS to Azure to Google to Alibaba, Oracle Cloud, et cetera. We can drill down into these to take a look at individual components. And we also have the ability to run, as I mentioned earlier, those scenarios of migrating off-prem onto the cloud so that you can make the best choices to where those workloads should reside. Next slide, please. So now we're at the end, so let's go. So I'm going to move right into a demo because it's interesting to take a look at something rather than just taking a look at slideware. So I'll just share my screen here and off we go. So I'll get rid of this right here. Everybody can see my screen, I assume. So this is the main login. And when you log into CloudHealth, as you would expect with any product, you can be presented with a main dashboard that's customizable for you, that gives you the information that you would like to see. These, of course, are all changeable. You set them up with widgets that you create when you go into your reporting for your cost history or cost usage. You create something that is of interest to you, you save it, and then it becomes part of your choosable dashboard when you log in. You'll notice that across the top, I'll take a look at this, I'll return to this in just a second. Across the top, you have the major hyperscalers right here, as well as Alibaba, which we just recently came GA inside of the product. Whatever one you attach to, you would go to your setup, you would connect to your master payer or to your core reports, et cetera. And then the information will start to be collected and it will build out all of your cost history. Underneath data center over here is if you have operations, as Brock was talking about, and you install the management pack, which is free, which there's a northbound and a southbound one. If you install the northbound one, it will push information directly out of operations and up into CloudHealth. So you can take a look at what it's costing you up inside of here. And so then you can do comparisons and multi-cloud billing from across everything that you're connected to, as well as your data center. So let's just take a look at this, for instance. So we might come in here and we might say, okay, inside of our data center, we want to take a look at some of the reporting. So we could take a look at, as I mentioned earlier, the multi-cloud cost history. So if I have a connection into AWS and Azure and our data center, anything that you're connected to will show in here. Underneath here, you go, well, I'm taking a look at visually what my costs are, as well as the breakdown numerically below it. Anything that I change visibly up here will be reflected numerically down below. You have the ability to get very granular with this also. So in this instance, I have AWS, my Azure. I happen to be interested in some of the information flowing up out of operations from my data center. I could eliminate things that I'm not interested in by clicking on them and pulling them out. But you notice that my data center is extremely small. I can't see my billing as I roll over it. So let's just get rid of all the rest of the noise by holding down our shift key and just moving straight to the data center. Now I'm taking a look at just what's happening from being pushed up from operations. We have very little going on here, $23. We're down to $8, but ooh, something happened right here. And we jumped up to $95. And so I might be interested in seeing what this is. So by double clicking on it, you can drill straight down and it shoots us into the cost history associated on a daily interval, which I can change to a weekly or a monthly if I want, of what exactly is happening inside of our data center. This information is also available in operations, so you could access it in either way. Operations does a better job of, since it's already on-prem, of breaking down the individual virtual machine costs. But this CloudHealth, since it's geared towards cloud and multi-cloud costing comparisons for FinOps, will give you a more of an overarching comparison with some recommendations grouped in. So inside of here, I can say, well, I would like to see this. Right now, I have it on daily so that we can see what's going on. I can change my category to something that I'm more interested in. By the way, all these things on the left-hand side with a P are what we call perspectives. So any assets that you bring in from any of your clouds, we can group them together into something that's more meaningful to you. And so you could say, I would wish to see anything with the tag of an owner or the tag of a project or a line of business. These are configurable for each person because you're going to have a different tagging structure. No two companies usually have the same tagging structure. So these are very easy to build out. You group them together, give them a name that means something, and then we're able to pull that information and pop that into a cost history or a dashboard. So we might want to say, I want to see this potentially by, I chose a project. So my x-axis, let me move that to my project. So I'll move my x-axis over to projects. So now we can see inside of coming up out of operations, we have a wallet project that's sitting out here that has some cost associated with it. We can also drill in and we can say, keep my category as a project, but I'd like to see something like the owner of the virtual machines that are running inside of that project. So who, Chris, Dave, Zeus, what are they doing inside of here? And then, of course, we can drill in even further and see what virtual machines Chris or Dave or Zeus are running and what the entire costs are associated with them. So one of the powers of this is that we have, I'll just move back to AWS for a moment. We can come in and we have these multi-cloud reports. We have all of the costing reports for historical and current usage. We can look at budgets. We can create budgets and look at a budget versus an actual. I'll just say, this of course keeps you from going over. We don't want to incur at the end of the month a giant overage. So by creating a budget and then keeping track of the budget versus the actual, we can have it alert, for example, when you hit a 95 percentile of the use of that budget, and then alert a group of people and say you are getting close. Or we can automate the purchasing of more on-demand storage or something like that, if you so desire. So we can actually set that up so we have something that will actually do reactionary components with the budget versus actual. We have underneath the cost history, it gives us the ability to drill down visually and numerically as well as downloading through CSV, or up here underneath subscribe, we can actually subscribe to and have these reports, once we have it set the way we like, to be sent automatically to, again, one of those business units that we could set up underneath our flexible organizations. Okay. We also can take a look at things such as data transfer. So we can look at data transfer by gigabytes or by numeric value, by dollar signs, inbound, outbound, days, etc. So we have a filtration system. So we can come in and we can take a look at, is this going in? Is it going out? What is my transfer types? And break it down so that we can also group the information for not only what are the costs incurred, but what are the transfers rolling in or rolling out, and associate that also so that people are well aware of not just what their operations are costing residing, but what their transfer rates costs are also. And then we always have people ask about forecasting. So we have the ability to forecast in days, depending on the report that you're pulling right here, in days or months. So we can take a look at trend analysis and then report out where we think you're going, so that you can have budgetary actions for making sure that you have the correct amounts when those bills come in. Okay. Underneath our recommendations, we have a brand new right sizing engine, which is very cool. Inside of here, we can take a look at, virtual machines that are residing out in, I'm currently on AWS, but it'd be the same for Azure or Google or whatever they happen to be on. We can take a look at the trends and say, the average CPU usage is trending down or trending up. And we might recommend, right sizing this to a smaller virtual machine, or migrating it to different storage, or potentially powering it off on the weekends because it's only being used Monday through Friday. Again, the purpose of this tool is to save you money. It's a financial operations center of excellence tool that allows you to go out, analyze what's happening in your environment, make those recommendations, act upon them, and then basically, save your company a tremendous amount of costing. Let me go back to my right sizing engine. We do have the ability underneath our actions of being able to manage our efficiency targets, as well as adding custom efficiency targets. This is fairly new in the product. People have been asking for this. So we can manipulate this information if we so desire. We also have, I'll try to zip through it, I don't want to cut into Brock's time here. We have savings plans. So we'll go out and we'll take a look at your savings plans that you currently have, and then make recommendations. Well, we're fully optimized right here. Make recommendations for should you move to a 1 or a 3 year partial or all up front. And so we analyze this on-prem, we ingest everything, and then try to make recommendations for, we do make recommendations for new savings plans, optimizations, and thus so that you can renegotiate as those plans come up for renewal. And then underneath the government section right here, I did want to touch on this. So we do have anomaly detection also. So we ingest all of the anomalies that come in through Azure, AWS, etc. We have an AI engine on the back end that is trainable. And so as these anomalies come in, you would choose a submit feedback. You would start to train the AI engine of, hey, this is something that's normal or not. Very quickly, it'll start to eliminate, kind of like training your email to say, I don't want this junk mail coming in from blah, 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 blah. It will learn what is not important, and then it will only bubble up the few things that are actually important. So you're not just inundated with all of this anomaly noise rolling in. Not only do we detect the anomalies, but we can, when you drill in, we will give you the root cause, as well as what do we recommend to fix it. And that might be a power off, it might be a migration, it might be something happening inside of your operating system, etc. So I think anomaly detection is one of the interesting components inside of here that allows you to keep your finger on that pulse of what's happening. So again, you don't end up with some ginormous bill at the end of the month. And then I'll actually wrap it up here and move over to Brock here in just a second. But anything that you create down here then becomes available in a dashboard, as I mentioned before. And then you can have that automatically sent to a group of people or a person or a Slack channel. But I did want to mention very quickly that we also have pulse reports. And underneath the pulse reports, we can take a look at cost summary or a quick health check and make recommendations on the fly of here's things that I think that you can do to optimize your environment as we progress through the month, and make recommendations for cost savings inside of here. So the health check and the cost summary, it's taking a second to draw on. I'm not sure why it's taking so long. But the health check will go out and make these recommendations that you may or may not be able to act upon. It might be a database and you cannot change its size, but it will give you here's recommended and how much we think you can save right off the bat by following these recommendations. So here's our possible recommendations right here, constantly running a savings up to this. And this is what we think you can do to change that would give you some immediate savings over here on the right-hand side. So with that, I will stop. This is just a couple of touches on some of the things that the product does, but you could go on for several hours onto creating custom line items, creating your budgets versus actuals, the chargeback, or excuse me, the show back, guilt back, all of that functionality is all built into this product. And again, to reiterate one last time, is that it's geared towards saving you that money so you can reallocate it to other things that will better grow and drive your business. Brock, anything to share on that, or how we doing?
No, thank you so much. That was great. Graham does have one question in the Q&A if you want to hit that.
Perfect.
And then I'll share my screen here. Let me know when y'all can see it. Can you see my VRops UI?
Yes.
All right, beautiful. Okay, so kind of pivoting back to vRealize operations and costing and pricing. So Brian, spoke mostly about public cloud costing, right sizing, and the ability that CloudHealth has. So we're going to jump back to ops and explore cost and price. So as you can see here on my homepage, I've actually built a cost details dashboard and made it my landing page, right? So if it's cost you're interested in, we can get you all of the details, all of the gory details, and make it your homepage if you want, right? So 8.10, of course, brought the ability to have tabbed homepages. I think 8.12 is going to even bring us more, but if it's cost that you want to see every day, if you want to see it every week, what have you, all of the metrics are available, right? And we'll dig into those here in a little bit. So if you want to put them in a dashboard, great. If you want to build a report for it, great. If you want to build a view that you use within a dashboard or a report, we can do all of that. The point is that ops will do all of the work for you based on how you've told it to allocate cost or price. And then we can surface it back to the consumer, right? So you can show this back to departments, to managers, to executives, to whoever wants to know, right? What it's costing you to actually run a VM. And this is a really nice way that you can actually get resources back, right? So if you show folks, that they're the top consumer, ironically, this is my vRops box, this VM is costing this much, potentially you have room to buy back some of those resources, maybe vCPU, maybe memory, maybe disk, what have you. So I am using the cost engine and all of the metrics provided to build this dashboard, right? So not only can I show data center costs, cluster costs, host costs, VM costs, but I can also use the power of vRealize operations and things like the top end widget to show you my most expensive clusters. What hosts are my most expensive ones? What VMs are the outliers? And ironically, 3 of these are mine. So, my DevOps team has reached out to me and said, hey, you're consuming a lot of resources. Do you need them? Answer is yes. But the point is that you now have visibility into all of the data. So if you're interested in these dashboards, I'm happy to share any of them. Many of them are already up on VMware code. So if you want to get them, I'm happy to share. So let's take a step back. So let's jump back to plan and cost. So this was our landing page, right? So a beautiful new dashboard that gives us visibility into local cloud, private cloud, vSphere on-prem, VMC, as well as the hyperscalers. So, and it gets data different ways, right? It might get data via vCenter. It might be consuming some of the data that Brian just showed via CloudHealth. And now we're showing it all back to you, right? So, you have the ability to see how much of your total cost of ownership is being consumed by compute, how much is being consumed by storage, by capacity, which of your data centers are the most expensive. And then down below that, I touched on this a little bit earlier, you have the ability for potential savings, and we base those savings on cost. But by savings, I mean things that are reclaimable, things like idle VMs that are just sitting around doing nothing, orphan disks, right? Orphan VMDKs, oversized VMs that have entirely too much vCPU and memory, powered off VMs that are just sitting there with allocated capacity that aren't doing anything, reclaimable hosts, VM snapshots. So we have the ability to assign cost to those and potentially save that cost if we do reclamation. Lots of different ways we can do reclamation. You can do it via Automation Central, right? So, I can add a job where I am deleting snaps, right? Snaps are cost. Can do things like deletion of idle VMs, power off of idle VMs, downsizing of oversized VMs. So this is the ability to do reclamation, to buy back capacity, and in turn, save cost, right? So back to our cost dashboard, a lot of these are over here on the right-hand side, right? So the ability to look at chargeback, showback based on VM, based on pod, the ability to look immediately at something like right sizing, right? The VROPS engine is very powerful in terms of what it does to determine, is a VM oversized? Is it undersized? How far do you want to go in terms of turning that dial? So you have the ability to look at these dashboards, visualize the data, and then take action. So I want to say the VM right sizing details dashboard was newish in 8.6. Brandon Gordon, one of the senior TMMs at VMware, developed this dashboard. It's now in product. Very, very useful when you're looking to right size and save on costs. So beyond just the ability to see costs here, you also have the ability to say, see costs within AWS, right? So I am consuming this from CloudHealth. So CloudHealth is providing my AWS costing. I'm consuming it into vRealize Operations via the management pack. So like Brian said, there's two management packs between vRealize Operations or Aria Operations and CloudHealth. One is a push, one is a pull. So if you push data, say you like the CloudHealth UI, you want all of your costing data to go there, we can push it there. If you prefer the VROPS UI and you want to see all of the data here, we can pull it here. The point is that now you have visibility into private cloud, public cloud, and everything in between. So for example, here's a VROPS and CloudHealth costing details dashboard that I developed to show private cloud, so vSphere on-prem, as well as Azure regions and AWS regions. So I can show you your most expensive VMware clusters. I can show you your most expensive Azure subscriptions, and I can show you your most expensive AWS services on a single pane from a single source. Now you can develop alerts around these. You can make notifications on them. You can use any of the feature function within vRealize Operations to kind of expand on these. But now you have all of your costing data in a single spot, right? So let's jump back a little bit to our planning and costing. So we've explored the cost dashboard. This is a great landing page. I encourage you, once you have your cloud or your costing configured, to explore it. See which of these dashboards over on the right-hand side resonate with you. You'll like some, you'll prefer others over others, and you can make them your homepage if you want. Now, you also have the ability to use your costing mechanisms within the what-if analyses. So, for example, if you're planning a migration, be it on-prem to VMC, be it on-prem to public cloud, well, you now have the ability to go ahead and select your region, go ahead and talk about instance types, how much reserved capacity you might want, how much room you need for steady state CPU headroom, and then say, well, okay, I want to migrate all of my VMs, for example. All right, select all 13 and go ahead and run the scenario. And this scenario will take into consideration the costs that you have ingested, right? So we spoke about it a little bit earlier, a couple different ways to establish VMC on AWS costs. One is bill-based and the other one is rate card-based. So this what-if analysis is using the costing or pricing from that rate card in order to determine how many hosts you're going to need in VMC and AWS for capacity for these particular VMs. Okay, so I want to show you a little bit about cost settings. We spoke about this when we were talking about the cluster cost and base rate analyses, but this is really where you make all those changes, right? So if you jump into configure, go to cost settings, you'll see 4 different tabs up top. Cost drivers. So this will give you the ability to adjust on things like your server hardware, right? So this will discover the hardware you're running in your environment. I'm running some UCS gear, some PowerEdge gear, some ProLiant gear in my lab. So it has discovered that. And then we have a reference database that we use as sort of our starting point, right? So these are generally MSRP prices. They are our reference database, and they give us the ability to at least have a starting cost. Now you can change those. You can do bulk export and imports based on certain infrastructure. You can do the same for VMC and AWS as well. I'm talking about vCenter right now, but you also have the ability to turn dials around storage, around license, around application, just the ability to add cost as you wish. Now, cluster cost is basically where we were changing our cluster cost calculation methods, right? So if you recall, we had the usable capacity after HA and buffer, and then the actual utilization. So I definitely have a preference. I personally like the allocation model because I view vCPU and memory once allocated that someone needs to pay for it, not necessarily when they're used, but we have the ability for 3 different options. The cloud providers tab is where you will adjust your rate cards, right? So we have rate cards for all of the VMC variants listed here, as well as the hyperscalers. And then finally, the pricing tab is where you'll make your pricing adjustments, right? So you'll see I have a few different tabs here. If we just jump into the one I've developed here, you can see I'm using rate-based pricing here. So again, this is over and above what your VM might cost you. This is what you might use as a price. So this is what you might charge back a department or a user or an application group. So in this case, and ignore the numbers, they're just round numbers. You can use whatever you want. I am charging $1,000 per vCPU per month, and I'm always charging that, whether it's powered on or not, because again, I view vCPU as allocated, that somebody needs to pay for it. You have the ability to change that. You can do the same thing for memory. You can do the same thing for storage, right? Now, if I wanted to use cost, I could just go ahead and this will base your price on cost. So say, for example, I don't know, I wanted, a 10% upcharge or something, right? So I'm going to say 10% upcharge on CPU, on memory, on storage, what have you. I don't want to use the cost. I want to use rate in this case. So I'll go ahead and use the rates that I have here. Now, you also have the ability to put prices on guest OS. You have the ability to use tags as well as overall charges. Now, the guest OS in this case are those discovered by VMware tools in vCenter. If you're wondering what the guest OS names here are, map those to the guest OS discovered by VMware tools. As you know, there's another guest OS, which is the one provided by vCenter. So be sure to use the one provided by VMware tools. But now I have the ability to have guest OS charges. I can do them hourly. I can do them daily, weekly, or monthly. Go ahead and add, remove as you wish. Now tags, they are very, very powerful when we're talking about costing or pricing, right? So these are using vSphere tags, and I have the ability to assign prices for backups. or potentially for storage archives, or whatever a VM might be used for. If you have a tag on it, I can charge you for it or price you for it, right? So this gives us the ability to do that. It's a really powerful mechanism in terms of pricing. And then finally, just general overall charges, what you might charge somebody for a setup fee, or what you might charge them, per month or per week. And then, of course, you have the ability to assign it based on vCenters or clusters. And once that is done, well, then you have pricing, right? So if I were to, let's just go into the dashboard here. You can go into any dashboard or a VM that it sits on. In fact, let's just go ahead and look for mine because I know that it's really expensive. So top right, I just look for a VM. Again, you go to the summary page, metrics tab to see all of the metrics. So if I were to search for cost here, for example, you will see all of the cost metrics that I have for it. So month to date total cost. Again, if you recall, the cost engine runs daily, by the way. So I want to say midnight UTC, 7 p.m. Central. That is configurable via administration. I'll show you how to configure that here in a minute. But you also will have price, right? So, for example, my box, what am I charging? Well, $24 for CPU, $128 for memory. You can see the storage price. The additional price, that would be, tags, things like that. And then you have a total price. So the total price for my VM, $706 month to date. So now we have all of the data. You have the prices, you have the cost, and you have the drivers. So now you can provide it back to the users. And there's lots of different ways to do that. Generally, I'll use dashboards, right? So say, for example, I'm just going to look for cost. Here's the cost details dashboard that I showed earlier, giving you all of your cluster costs, your most expensive clusters, hosts, and VMs. But maybe you want something a little bit different, right? So this gives you each of your data centers, what the total monthly cost is, what your clusters, data stores, and VMs are costing, as well as kind of a breakdown in terms of what those costs are, right? So, I have quite a few different VMs here that, are costing me a minimal amount. Maybe I just want to get rid of those and kind of see the high flyers here. But anytime you can click on these donut charts, you'll see the details of what those are. And then you can click on any of these links to dig in and see the cost or see the price or see the, what memory might be costing you or disk or what have you. I always encourage folks, once the costing engine, you've turned all the dials you want to, you have allocation-based costs, you have whatever you want, then you publish the data back to the users for consumption. It can be used all sorts of different ways. One, cost is cost, right? Everybody wants something at an affordable price. But the other use case here is reclamation. Whenever I am trying to buy back resources, be they vCPU, be they memory, be they disk, what have you, it's always beneficial to show cost. You can always buy back resources if you show someone that how much money they're paying for it, right? So there's all sorts of different ways. Many of these dashboards are shared up on VMware Code, by the way, which is code.vmware.com. And I'll share a few links out here at the end. But for example, you now have the ability to right size, and you can right size based on cost, right? So which of my VMs are the largest? How much do they cost? And what is vCPU costing me? How can I actually buy that back, right? So you can see all sorts of different dashboards that I'm using here. And then finally, of course, which Brian Lewis was talking about earlier, you have the ability to ingest from CloudHealth. So you can see I'm ingesting AWS, Azure, and GCP. Costs, I don't have any GCP stuff, but AWS, at least in this lab, showing you what your AWS costs are according to CloudHealth, just visualized within vRealize Operations. So you can see I have a few different ways to visualize it, but now you have a single pane, a single source where you can identify your most expensive resources. It might be a VM, it might be a cluster, it might be an Azure region, but you have a place you can go that is definitive, that you can generate alerts on, you can make reports, you can do anything that you want with the data, including things like right sizing, which is a real world use case here. So with that, I know we're at the top of the hour, but I wanted to leave some time for, I don't know, some conversation, maybe a little bit of Q&A. It looks like there's quite a few questions in the Q&A that I might be able to get to. So, Brian Lewis, anything that I missed that you wanted to touch on, or Brian Wookner, do you want to open it up for questions, or how do we handle this at the end?
This is Brian Lewis, and I'll hop in for just one moment. I had a private Q&A sent to me direct. And so I thought I would just answer it very quickly. If I could steal the screen back, I don't want to jump back and forth.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Go ahead.
I'll just do this real fast. And so
all yours.
I was being asked about recommendations for savings plans. So I'll just use AWS, but you could choose any one of these. Underneath the recommendations, this didn't have anything in it earlier when I touched on this, because we were looking at our sandbox. So if I went and I changed this to something like, CloudHealth Redshirt and refresh this, let me get this out of our way here, sorry. Then it will then grab whatever I've chosen up here. I can take a look at minimum, specifically hour commitment, specific total coverage, and then it will pull that information in and give you those recommendations for 1 year or 3 year, no upfront, whatever it happens to be. So the savings plans portion, you can choose it to make the recommendations based on what you're interested in seeing. And then, of course, you can export it down into a CSV if you so desire. So I just thought I would address that because it came directly in. The second one that came into me while Brock was talking was underneath the data center. We were talking about migrations. We can also, if you have that connection into operations, we can go to the data center recommendations component right here, sorry. And here's a migration assessment wizard that you can also run, that will give you just another perspective. Again, I think that these two products work in tandem and they complement each other. And so inside of here, we can look at, again, if we wanted to move something from VMware, what our choices are, up into one of the clouds, we choose that, and then we choose our region. It will go out based upon metrics down here of your CPU headroom, your commitment for terms for 1 or 3, all up front. You can run these over and over and over again, and then it will pull all the information in. It takes it about 20 seconds. It's probably about ready to be done here. And then it will compare all the pricing coming out of operations with whatever your cost and usage report ingestion is from the clouds, and then give you just a straight, hey, here's all the prices. So again, you can make the best decision possible for where to place the workloads in your environments. Looks like it's coming in now. Here it comes in. So this is not tied into the one that Brock was just showing you. So these numbers are going to be all crazy and skewed, but it just, for the demonstration, it will show you your on-prem costs, AWS, Azure, et cetera, and then you can drill them all down here. And this can become valuable information and a tool for you, once again, to make that recommendation as to where those workloads reside. So I'll return it at that point.
Oh, no, all good, Brian. I was actually going to share, while potentially Brian W. and Andy, you open it up for questions. I was going to share a slide with a few links here. Bear with me. Let me know when you can see my screen, Brian.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, cool. So a couple different things here. So there's a ton of resources around this, right? Not only for costing, but really for anything Aria Operations as well as CloudHealth. So you can always reach out to your TAM, right? I think that's a great place to start. They're very knowledgeable. They know all the players. A great place to start. Secondarily, you'll likely have a CMBU team that's covering you, right? That will cover and be able to address any of the Aria suite of tools, including CloudHealth. There's a few other links here. One is the VMware Cloud Management blog, which I list the URL. Second is a relatively new landing page called the VMware Apps and Cloud Management Tech Zone. So a lot of good information, a lot of tech content, including videos and whatnot, out on the apps.cloudmanagement.techzone.vmware.com. That's a mouthful. The fourth one is VMware Code. I love VMware Code. I think it's really valuable to customers, to partners, to us as employees. It's a great way for us to share content, be it dashboards, views, reports, super metrics around cost or price or what have you. So if you don't have VMware Code bookmarked, please do. There's a ton of great stuff out there. Go to the sample exchange or samples and you'll see all of it. And then finally, the VMware Cloud Management team has a YouTube channel, and there is a ton of great content there, including videos from technical marketing architects, from product management, lots of great stuff, not just around cost, but around the entire Aria suite. So go ahead and bookmark or screenshot this. I'm happy to share this with anyone on the call. So with that, I will open it up for questions, Q&A, conversation, what have you.
Yeah, feel free to, if anybody has questions, type them into the Q&A or raise your hand in Zoom and we can unmute you and can ask it live if you would prefer. I will say, Brian, Brock, this was really useful content today. Really appreciate you doing the presentation. I guess I'll wrap up some things. We can stop the recording here in just a second, and we can, feel free again to continue to raise your hands or ask questions while we wrap this up. But and we can answer them after we stop the recording. But this presentation was recorded. Your TAM can make that available to you. We look forward to seeing you guys next month on May the 11th, when we'll be covering vSphere identity roadmap. So definitely appreciate you guys' time today, and look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks.
Thank you. And